Hello, my name is Peter Boring, and I greet you a warm welcome to this session on the exciting new page scripting tool for user acceptance testing that we launch in preview in this release. So, are you struggling with user acceptance testing today? Is it challenging getting good or even any test coverage? Do you track user acceptance tests in documents? Are you waiting for tedious manual testing to complete go live? Are the frequent updates causing test headaches? Would you like to run acceptance tests as part of DevOps to capture regressions already during development or as part of rollout? And are you dreaming of empowering consultants or even customer personas to capture and execute user acceptance tests for better agility and reduce costs? Well, then we have great news for you, because in this release, we are introducing a new tool allowing customers and consultants to exactly do that. Easily record and play user acceptance tests directly in the Business Central web client, driving higher test coverage and agility while reducing costs. We released this tool as a preview in 2024 release wave 1. So how can you start trying this tool out and give us feedback? Well, you access the page scripting tool from the settings menu. And that doesn't matter whether it's online or on-premise. I have an example of both here. Now, to use the tool, we have separate permissions for recording and for playing scripts. And so the permission to record is basically opt-out by default. However, since replay can actually insert or change data in the environment, the permission to play has to be granted to the user. And we actually right now support playback both in production and in sandboxes. But we will warn if you're trying to play scripts, recorded scripts, in a production environment. So, how do you go about this? Well, when you open the page scripting tool, it opens up as a pane to the right side of the web client, just like the page inspector tool. And in that tool, you can initiate a new recording, or you can open a previously saved recording. You both have an option in the toolbar for doing this, but you can also use the buttons in the welcome text that describes how to use or getting started with this tool. So when you then start a new recording, which is what I'm showing here, then the tool immediately enters the recording state. And the way you see that is by this sort of a red blinking circle that you also see in the screenshot here, and that indicates a recording. Basically, the icons that we're using here should be familiar to you from sort of, record and play experiences on devices. You can also see that we haven't really recorded any steps yet. So the list of steps recorded is empty. You can then go about and perform various steps. So in this case, we have, during the recording, navigated to the customer's page was shown, and we invoked a row on that list. And that will show up then in the recorded steps in the list. Also, the last step, which is then showing the customer card, will be highlighted and is the active step. And for the last active step, you have some additional things you can do with regards to editing that step, and we'll talk about that during this session. Then when you're completed with your recording, you can hit stop and then save it, and you can even restart a recording from the end to add additional steps. Now, a core concept of user acceptance testing is to verify an expected outcome of performing a given set of steps. So to support this, we allow you to, as part of the recording, insert so-called validation steps to check that the outcome, when you replay the recording, right? And so to do this, you can right-click a control, a field. Here we have right-clicked the number in the general fast tab, and you can see that you have a validate submenu, and part of that has an option for validating whether the current value is 10,000. So by invoking this option, it will actually insert a script, a step in the script, as we are seeing here, to validate that the number indeed is 10,000. Now, if maybe it's not 10,000 that you want, right? So, but that was what was there during the recording, but maybe you want to test it for another value, or maybe you want to test it for being different than what it normally is, so it fails, for some reason. You can click the 3 dots to open up a context menu on the step and select properties, and that will open up a properties pane in the page scripting pane, and there you can set the value that is being used for the validation. Again, you can see 10,000 here. You even have the choice of using various operators, or choose between several operators. So you can, for instance, compare so that the value is equal to, or greater than, or less than, etc. Then when you're done, you can save this script so that you basically download it. Scripts are saved in YAML format, and we'll talk more about that at the end of this session. But once you have a saved script, you can share it, you can give it to someone else, and they can rerun that script. Of course, for it to work, not just fail, it needs to be run in an environment similar to where it was recorded, right? You have to have the pages and objects and functionality to be similar. But that is also the intent, normally, that you want to verify over time that the behavior in a given setup remains correct. So let's have a look at our first recording. So let's jump to the web client. So here I am inside of the Business Central web client. And as I mentioned, you invoke the tool in the settings menu, and we have page scripting option. And also, as mentioned, you need to have permissions to be able to use this. And of course, I have that in this session, both for recording and for playing back. As we saw in the slides, when you open the page scripting tool, you have a getting started greeting here, and we would like to start a new recording. Okay, so here we now have the page scripting tool recording. You see that by the sort of blinking, flashing red dot here for recording that we saw in the slide. So I can now perform or record my steps. We see that no steps have been recorded. So let's start by opening the sales orders. And we see that the tool will capture that I navigated to sales orders and that the sales orders page actually showed up. I can then go and select an entry in the sales order list. Yeah, and so now we have this sales order open, and maybe I want to validate something here. Maybe I want to validate that the contact is actually Robert Towns. So I'm going to right-click Robert Towns, and I'm going to go to the validate menu, and I'm going to say that, let's validate that the current value is Robert Towns. And so that will insert a step here that I would want to validate Robert Towns. So this is our recording for now. Let's stop the recording and then go back to the slides. So we saw how easy it was to record a number of steps and also insert validation. But, that's great. But of course, we want to be able to play those steps back again to verify if the capture test still runs, for instance, after an update. And so when you are in playback, and this is an example, this is basically the script that I just recorded. You have an action to play. We saw the record before, but of course, when you want to play something, you have to press play. We support that instead of playing, that you can single step. So you can use the next or the previous to go back and forth and execute the steps, right? But it's important to understand that when you go back or the previous action, there's no undo in that. You're just basically redoing it. You're going back to redo the steps, right? There's no undo in this. You can also rewind to the beginning, right? So if you stopped the execution, or if you said next, but not all the way through, and you want to restart, you can rewind to start. And basically, you see in this view that the last line is gray and active. That is basically sort of the step indicator for the active line, right? And that is the one you're moving with previous and next and rewind. In this case, the script is actually failing. So you get a notification that it is failing, and you, apart from the steps that are passing, I mean, you get an indication with the green check mark here for the steps that passed, but you also get a red exclamation point for the step that failed. It will actually show you the error here, right? So in this case, and I will show you that later, I changed the name a little bit, so it's not the correct name, and of course that will fail in playback. So let's see how that works. We are back again in the web client, and we have the page scripting that we recorded, or the page script that we recorded before. And I would like to basically just reset to the beginning here, because I would like to play it, right? And we kind of left in the last step here. So I used the rewind to start. And then I also went back to sort of my starting point, which was in the role center here. So I'm gonna press play. And that is then going to run the whole script. I could have moved one step ahead only, but here I just press play to record everything. And in this case, everything is running, right? Because we haven't changed anything. So one of the things I might be interested in, and that was what I showed in the slides, is that maybe I want to validate to another value, right? And so in this case, let's not validate to Robert, but Rob Towns, right? And that will likely fail, or that is the expectation. So let's just stop this and rewind. We've already rewind and go back to home here. So I'm at a starting point, and I'm gonna run again. And so it's again going to perform the task. And as you see, now the last step of validation is failing. And we're told that we were expecting Rob Towns, but we got Robert Towns. So this basically shows, how easy it is to record a page script and replay it as a user acceptance test. Now, these are simple scenarios, but as I mentioned in the beginning, you can also open recordings. And so let's have a look at some existing recording here. This is a little longer recording that will navigate to sales orders. It will then filter down to the datum customer. And then it will open it up and look up on the cell to customer number and select something and close it down. And we can run that again. And we will see that it runs through each step. And in this case, everything completed, right? So this was a little more advanced scenario of validating a recorded user acceptance test. So when you want to play back a script, you can actually decide only to run to a certain step, right? So if you go to the context menu on the step you want to run to, you can select run to here. And then playback will execute and run only to that step. And you see that here that we have the green check marks down until that step. Now, if you want to continue, you can either press play to just continue playing everything, or you can select to run to a later step in the same manner. Yeah, so we saw how easy it was not just to record, but also to play a user acceptance test that you recorded in the page scripting tool. When you've done that, maybe you want to share that recording and its result. We have something we call basically the playback log. You can share that. So there is in the toolbar for the page scripting tool, there is an opportunity to share, copy a link. And that link is self-contained. It basically includes the full recording. And if you ran it, it will also include the state of that recording. And all of that is hashed in a base 64 payload that might not mean anything to you, but basically it means that the link that you're getting to your environment will include a lot of strange characters that is a very efficient representation of this test case and the result. And then you can take this link and then you can give it to someone else, and they can, if they have access to that environment, of course, they can invoke that and they can see the page script as well as the result, maybe to further investigate why this is failing in the test. So that was basically the basics of this, but there's a lot more. So let's talk about all of the advanced features that you have as well. So to begin with, the page scripting tool has its own clipboard, and this can be used to store results that you get back during recording steps and reuse those later in follow-up steps, basically. And the way this works is, again, with the context menu on fields. Whenever you have a value, you can go right-click during recording. You will have the page scripting context menu. You can then select copy, and that will copy it to the page scripting clipboard. That means that at a later stage, a separate step where you need that value, you can again invoke the context menu, but now you can go to paste, and as we see here in this example, we have an option to put in the cell to customer name, the Datum Corporation. We can then paste that in that next step, right? So that's a really convenient way to reuse this, to reuse values across steps. Related to that, during a recording, there could also be certain session information, for instance, the user ID that you sometimes need in certain tests. So in that scenario, similar to before, you can go into the context menu for page scripting, and you can now paste in on the session info the user ID. In this case, it was the admin, right? That might be relevant for certain scenarios. Then we have a number of step branches. The first one is what we call conditional step branches. So sometimes a set of steps only apply on a given condition, right? So imagine that you open a list page. Maybe if the list page is empty, you want to do something different than if it has content. If it's empty, maybe you want to create a line. Whereas if it has something, maybe you just want to select a line and check something, right? And so to cater for that, during a recording, you can again use the context menu. So here I'm on an empty list, and you can see I go into the page scripting context menu, and I go to the Add Conditional Steps When option. And here it suggests that my possibility is that when the row count is 0, I can do something, or I can insert a conditional step. So imagine that we've done that. That will then insert in the list of steps in the page scripting pane this condition, right? So here it says when control 1 row count is 0. And you can see that the steps below that says no step is kind of nested inside. That's because now we created a branch or nesting where everything that we record will happen only if that condition is met. And so here we have scenarios that I show here that I ran a step that then became nested under that conditional branch, right? When you then want to stop executing steps in that branch, you select the end scope, and that goes out of the conditional branch. And that means that the subsequent steps that you record will no longer be nested under that condition, but will happen afterwards, right? So your total flow will be something happens. If a condition is met, then only then do something. And then when you're done with doing that, go back and continue the script. Yeah, and maybe I should mention that you can, just as we saw before, and I actually have that in the beginning here, but I didn't talk to it. When you have that conditional step in the properties pane that you can invoke with the 3 dots context menu on a step, of course you can change that to have a different condition and with a different operator. Right? So you can say that if it's more than 5 rows, you want to do something or similar to that. Let's jump to the related concept of branching, but for optional pages, right? So sometimes in a flow, a page will appear, but it's conditionally. It's not always appearing. It's because of something else, right? And here and again, you can insert a branch, but now you make that page that appear an optional page. So you see here in the screenshot that I select from the context menu on the step in the page scripting pane to make that an optional page. And that basically means that all of the steps that I record from there on until I exit the branch will only happen if that page is shown. So we can see that here. I say that this page is optional. For this case, there's no properties. It's either showing or not. And right now there's no steps. Then on that page that appears when I record, I will do some steps. And then when I'm done, I'm going to say end scope. And then I can continue the recording to record the steps if that page is not shown. Right? So that gives you, again, control over branchings in your recorded steps. By the way, in the UI here, if you get very long scripts, you can collapse these nested structures, right? That's what I'm showing here. You should be familiar with that concept, and that just makes it a little bit easier to read the overall script. Then we talked a number of times that you had the properties pane and you could put in a value. What I haven't shown yet is that you can actually also write an expression for very simple calculations. And we're using PowerFX as the expression language. And you might be familiar with PowerFX from the Power Platform or Excel. And in the properties pane, there is a reference to the PowerFX syntax. And in addition to PowerFX, we also give you 3 top-level objects that you can use in expression. You can call into the clipboard that we talked about before to pull out values there. You can call into something that we call parameters, which are really variables for the script, and we'll talk about those later. And you can also access the session info that I spoke about before. So to show a couple of examples here that you see, you could pick out the, maybe the customer card number, the number on the customer card. Maybe you save that to the clipboard, and in your flow, you just want to see whether that's being incremented by 1. It could also be that you want to generate a random name as part of generating a new object to have some uniqueness. Maybe you want to have a semi-random name, so that could be concatenating the customer with today's date or time or something like that. Then also, sometimes when you are executing steps or logic in Business Central, maybe it takes some extra time. Maybe it calls to an external web service where there can be some time happening, right? And to not time out and fail during playback, you can actually tell during recording that you expect things to take a little longer time. So we have the option of setting in a step, an extra step, which is a wait step. And you can go to it will default to 1 second or 1,000 milliseconds, and you can go to the properties and you can change that to whatever, 10 seconds or something like that. In general, you shouldn't really. So the wait states here are more to cater for the scenarios where you want to avoid the timeouts, but it's not something that you really want to use a lot. If there's no need for it, don't use it. Then we talked about that the scripts are really stored in the YAML format, and that's like metadata-driven format for clients here. And the nice thing about having YAML as the format is that it's kind of a standardized format, right? And that helps in editing scenarios, and it helps in DevOps scenarios as well. I have an example here of a script, and the high-level structure of the script is that there's like a header with the name and the description of this. Then we capture the role that is being used to record the script. We do that because everything is reliant on sort of the controls. So the script will point to controls in the UI. And whether they show up or not will typically depend on the role, because there can be role customizations. There can also be personalizations, of course. And then we have each of the steps, and some of the steps can be nested if we have these branches that I spoke about. And each step there can be different types of steps, and they are covered in the metadata for the steps. I won't go into detail on that, but that will give you a high-level understanding of the content. Now, there are a couple of scenarios, powerful scenarios, that we currently only support in YAML. So you have to go to edit them in the YAML. They are supported when you then play them in the client, but there isn't a page scripting user experience in the client for doing these things, only in YAML. And the first one is that you can, as I mentioned a little earlier when we talked about the expressions, you can actually parameterize scripts. So that's basically the equivalent of setting some variables that you can then use throughout the script to cater for, basically make it more robust and make it easier if you want to change that value to not have to change it in many places in the script, but just in the parameter list. And so in this scenario, in the example, you see we have the parameters node in the YAML file, and we specify a parameter called customer list number where we set the value to 10,000. And then in the steps, you can use that. So you can call up the parameters collection. So here in the step shown, we set the value by looking up in the parameters collection and pick out the customer list number from there. And that will then, of course, insert 10,000 when we execute this script. And as I said, you can use this in the expressions in the UI as well. So you could do the same parameters customer list number from within the UI. Then you cannot. So a common scenario, and we'll talk about that later, is also that it can be beneficial to make smaller scripts that are more specific and then tie them together in a suite, basically, where you execute the scripts in a sequence. But there's no way to really edit. There's not a lot of editing support yet inside of the web client experience of the page scripting tool. And we don't support any kind of suite management from in there. But you can actually do that in YAML, and only in YAML, of course. And so you can bundle multiple scripts there. And the way it works is that you use the include command in the script here. And so in the example here, you see that we have two includes. And basically, you point to the script file, right? So we're pointing to two different script files here. And the sequence, of course, matters. It's going to go top down when it executes. And you can use the parameters I just talked about to reuse variables across the scripts. Of course, the scripts that you include inside of those, they need to use those parameters as well for this to work, right? So basically, the way this works is that you have separate scripts, and then you create a new script which only caters for being sort of the suite, and then that's the one you execute, and then on load time, it will pull in the other included scripts. Okay, let's round off with a little bit of best practices and known things. So first off, I showed a couple of scenarios where we select in the list, and you probably saw that we don't track, the actual instance that we are selecting, like invoice number 47 or something like that. You basically pick from the top right. And so if you want to match a specific one, it can be a good idea during recording to try to set a filter in the list, because we are capturing that filter, to make sure that the line that you're interested in is shown at the top. And then it will be selected during the replay as well, because it will apply the same filters. Also, when you are relying on entities, maybe you need to use a custom or something like that in a script for a sales order. If you want to be in control, it can be a good idea to create a separate script for creating that customer, so that you're not relying on the fact of that being there in an environment where the data changes. And this is also a scenario where that suite concept that I talked about before could come in handy, where you make one recording for creating the customer and one recording for using a customer in the sales order, and then you create a suite tying those together, right? And that's basically what I just said here, that it's also good to break down the flow in smaller pieces. Then a couple of things that are good to know. As I said, the tool is in preview now. Please give us feedback on YAML and on ideas on this. Probably the biggest shortcomings at this point, it is the first version, right? And it is in preview, so there will be things, but there aren't that many, there's not a lot of support for during recording to change the steps, right? That, hey, I want to delete these two and rearrange. That's also because the sequence is important, right? So you cannot just omit a step in the middle. But there are things that would be nice to be able to do that you cannot yet do with editing the steps. Also, as I mentioned, you can only build suites in YAML, not in the client. And then I mentioned in the complete beginning that one of the nice things about this would be that you can run the scripts, play the scripts in pipelines. So as part of development or as part of sort of rollout of CI/CD, you can actually execute these to see if you have any regressions. And that's something that we're working on, but it's not yet supported to run that. You can only run them in the client at this point. Then there's a couple of sort of known issues. We're not recording designer interactions. If you open up the in-client designer, report previews cannot be closed. We don't handle notifications or multiple notifications that well. We really need the next previous buttons on cards to be there. If you have fields that are called, so basically we're relying on references to controls in the UI with a name. And if you put fields in different places with the same name, we might not find the right place. Also, sometimes you have messages or confirmation dialogues, etc., that can pop up in sort of, different flows before or after a page. And that can create some race conditions that where you record it in one way, and when you replay it, it actually happens in a different sequence. And that could lead to the replay failing. So that's something to be aware of as well. And then it's super important to mention that what is this tool not? Because you might be familiar with, just general test tools for web pages, HTML automation tools. And this is not an HTML automation tool, right? So we cannot automate control add-ins like charts or any embedded content like Power BI or Power Apps or something like that, or anything outside of Business Central where you want to orchestrate some kind of end-to-end flow that goes outside. It is relying on knowing about the controls and knowing about BC, but that is also what makes it stronger than an HTML automation tool for some of the scenarios that involve Business Central controls. I'm not covering it in this video, but it is worth mentioning also that you can actually use this tool together with some of these sort of more generic tool to actually plug in this and execute in a bigger end-to-end scenario. And by the way, remember, as usual, there's lots of resources available. You can ask us questions on YAML. You can join office hours on various topics. You can submit your ideas to the idea size, etc. So use the resources to give us feedback. Anyway, I hope you found, I think this is an awesome tool. I really urge you to try it out and give us feedback. I really hope that you like it. And I thank you for joining this session.